Welcome, everybody. I'm glad that you're here with us again tonight. Some of you may remember a while back we did our first mental health and masonry panel discussion. And one of the things that we touched on in that discussion of different issues that we might be dealing with in a more intense way during this time of COVID-19, one of the things we touched on was the practice of self-care. And we mentioned a few things in that presentation that people can do to be looking out for themselves a little bit more. And we wanted to follow up on that with another presentation dedicated to self-care. And we've got a new set of panelists this time, and I'll be telling you more about them as we go along. I'm going to go ahead and start our slideshow. Bear with me for just a second. All right. So you can see here who our panelists are, and they're all licensed in some way or another in the field of mental health. And I'll be talking more about them as we move along here. We're all members of a Facebook group called Artifices Animi, Craftsmen of the Mind. And this is a group for Masons with licenses, certifications, and graduate degrees in mental health related fields. We came together before the last presentation because we recognized that Masonry ought to be a place that is promoting mental health among its members, and there's plenty of symbolism in our degrees that really speak to good mental health practices. And so we wanted to be able to bring our backgrounds and expertise into the mix. We'd like you to know that members of our group are available to serve as speakers, facilitators, and writers. So if you've got a Masonic organization that would like to have a mental health professional who is also a Mason come to do some work with you along those lines, then certainly feel free to reach out to me or any of our panelists, and we'll be able to help you with that. There's some guidelines that we need to keep in mind, particularly for discussion tonight. Remember that we're in a live broadcast here, and that this broadcast will also be made available as a recording later. So don't reveal any information that you don't want publicly known. Also, keep in mind that this is not a therapy or counseling session. Even though our panelists are all licensed, they're just giving general advice tonight. They're not actually going to be giving specific directions or instructions or doing anything that would count as actual therapy or counseling. And also, if you're engaged in questions and answers with us, keep in mind that there might be other people that want to engage as well. If you are in need of urgent assistance, we've got a number here for you, 1-800-662-4357, or you can call 911, of course. Questions from the audience are welcome by chat. You can type in your chat at any time, and Randy will be taking a look at those. We will open things up for discussion later on. No political commentary, please, during this presentation. We just aren't interested in that for now. And as I said earlier, a recording will be made available. You can find that on the Refracted Light Facebook group, or you can also find it at the Contemplative Builder YouTube channel. All right. So I wanted to provide some general resources here. Each of our speakers tonight is going to be providing you some resources that you can use to follow up on different topics to get more information. We have done our best to provide a good list of resources in every case, but I found some general resources for self-care that I really want to bring your attention to. And the first one is the 2018 Personal Wellness Assessment. And that's on the Wellness Wheel, which has 8 segments to it that cover really a comprehensive approach to looking at the human life and the different things that we really can be doing to enhance the quality of life in all of those areas. There's this excellent article, 60 Simple Self-Care. Say that quickly. 60 Simple Self-Care Practices for a Healthy Mind, Body, and Soul. And lots of really good tips and things on there that you might not, some of them you might not think of right off the top of your head. And then for more in-depth mental health things, the National Institute of Mental Health is a great website, and so is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration website. So don't hesitate to check any of those out if they sound interesting or useful to you. So as we go through this, I'm going to be introducing each of our speakers and letting you know more about them before they actually do their parts. And I'm actually going to start off our discussions tonight. You can see my information here. I've been a licensed professional counselor supervisor for a very long time. I've been in mental health and higher education for most of my career. And I'm currently in semi-retirement working for the Counseling and Mental Health Center at Texas Christian University. And I also sit on the steering committee for the TCU Contemplative Studies group. And those are very rewarding and meaningful activities for me. You can see I've been around the fraternity for a long time. Some of you may know about the book that I have published. And you can see some of my other activities down there, including the Academy of Reflection and the Masonic Legacy Society. And if either of those sound interesting to you, they're both about contemplative practice in Freemasonry, and I encourage you to check them out. So tonight, I'm going to be talking about ecotherapy for self-care. Ecotherapy is also sometimes called nature therapy. And it's based upon the observation that it is good for us to be outdoors in contact with green living things and the soil of the earth and in the sunshine, hearing the sounds of nature like birds and running water and those sorts of things. Most of us know that those things are just relaxing. We find them relaxing when we're out in the wild or maybe in a garden someplace. Many urban gardens in downtown areas, people flock to them during their lunch periods because this is just something we're naturally drawn to. Masonry, of course, as an operative craft, is an outdoor occupation by and large, and that symbolism of that occupation carries through into our speculative art. And some of you may remember from the fellow craft degree that there's this statement that speculative masonry leads the contemplative to view with reverence and admiration the glorious works of creation. So this is something near and dear to our heart. We really do find value in being in nature for many reasons in the Masonic tradition. I mean, if you just think about the symbolism within our rituals, we've got lots of things that directly connect us with nature. There's a lot of emphasis on the sun, for example. We talk about the highest hills and lowest vales as being where our ancient brethren met, the quarries where they worked, the clay of the earth and its significance, and then, of course, acacia, which shows up in our third degree and then in some of our higher degrees in other rites. The fact is that until very recently in the story of humanity, we have spent most of our time outdoors. We evolved as outdoor beings. In fact, I have read that the human eye can discern more shades of green than any other color. And if you think about that from a survival point of view, it makes a lot of sense that we would be able to do that because green is so prevalent in nature that being able to distinguish different shades of green, different tones of green would be an important survival skill. So this is not just something that we intuitively know and that we instinctively know. It's not just something that just has some sort of mild effect on us. There's actually more and more research going into the effect of being outdoors in nature can have on us. we already know a lot about sunlight. That was probably one of the first things to actually be researched. And some of you may know about seasonal affective disorder, which happens to people who are not getting enough full sunlight during during the year or during their days. And that's actually a kind of form of depression that happens. And people can also experience anxiety in addition to that. And this is particularly common the farther you move toward the poles, because there's just less sunlight that people can experience. Also, we know that sunlight creates vitamin D. That's been known for a very long time, and we're learning more about how important that is to our well-being. So, for example, there's been a lot of recent talk about the role of vitamin D in blood pressure. There are other benefits to sunshine, and one of the resources that I have listed later on will give you a good link to that. But it's not just sunshine. There's also increasing research in other areas of the outdoors that provide us a lot of interesting data about what's going on in our relationship with nature and the natural world. Researchers from UK's University of East Anglia analyzed 143 studies of what is called forest therapy, which is a form of ecotherapy that's particularly about going out into forests and woods. And these studies included data from some 290 million participants from 20 different countries. And they found lots of benefits across the board with these studies. In particular, a 2010 Japanese study of forest bathing, that's a different term for forest therapy, researchers found that elements of the environment, such as the odor of wood, the sound of running stream water, and the scenery of the forest, can provide relaxation and reduce stress. Those taking part in the study experienced lower levels of cortisol, a lower pulse rate, and a lower blood pressure. The cortisol now, that is the chemical in our bodies that is associated with stress. When we're under stress, our body produces cortisol. And one of the effects of cortisol, it has many effects. One of the effects is that it contributes to the body's tendency to store up fat as a protective measure. But it can also contribute, cortisol can also contribute to cardiovascular disease and other problems like that. Another Japanese study showed that gazing at forest scenery, just looking at forest scenery for as little as 20 minutes, reduced cortisol levels by 13.4%. And a 2007 study from the University of Essex in the UK found that a walk in the country reduces depression in 71% of patients. The researchers found that as little as 5 minutes, just 5 minutes in a natural setting, whether walking in a park or gardening in a backyard, improves mood, self-esteem, and motivation. So there's something to think about. If you're just feeling stuck, maybe it's time for you to get outdoors and enjoy a little of the green scenery that might be available to you. Now, there's a really interesting thing here about ecotherapy that I think has been a surprise to a lot of people. And it's the power of green light itself. And you may notice that we're using a green background, and I did that intentionally because of things that I have learned about green light. There was a study done in which longtime sufferers of migraine and other chronic pain conditions were exposed to green light by the pharmacologist named Mohab Ibrahim. He exposed 25 migraine suffering volunteers first to white lights for 2 hours and then to green LED lights. And he measured multiple parameters, including pain reduction, frequency of migraines or headaches, frequency of fibromyalgia flare-ups, pain intensity and duration, and overall quality of life. On a scale of 0 to 10, with 0 indicating no pain and 10 the highest level of pain, migraine volunteers had an initial average baseline of 8, which is pretty significant. After completing the green light therapy, their score dropped down to an average of 2.8. The frequency of headaches dropped from 19 to 6.5 per month, and overall quality of life climbed from 48% to 78%. Now, what's going on here? One thing that we know is that green light can reset the circadian rhythm that has to do with sleep. And it affects melatonin, the hormone that regulates our sleep-wake cycles. What appears to be going on here is that a special photoreceptor system in the human eye picks up light and elicits non-visual responses, sending signals to the brain to reset the body's internal clock and alter melatonin production levels. New studies show that there are neuronal connections that span from the retina all the way to the spinal cord, passing through the parts of the brain that control and modulate pain. Green light changes the levels of serotonin and alters the endogenous opioid system, an innate pain relieving system found throughout the central and peripheral nervous system, gastrointestinal tract, and the immune system. And that's also been found by a neurologist at the Houston Methodist Hospital. So lots of research there. And with that, I just want to wrap up this part of the presentation tonight and say, give yourself some opportunity to experience these things. If you've got someplace close to you, maybe it's just getting out in your backyard or your front yard, or maybe there's a garden nearby, someplace, a public garden that you can go to and enjoy for 5 to 20 minutes a day, or maybe even an indoor garden in an office building, something like that. And if you don't have any of those options, I would suggest looking at videos. And I've got a link here for that. Down at the very bottom of this list of resources, you'll see a YouTube video on nature therapy. It's a 30-minute video. Now, you don't need to watch it for 30 minutes, but if you watched it 5 minutes here or there throughout your day at different times, maybe when you feel yourself getting stressed, you could get some of the benefits that we have been talking about here. You'll see some of my other resources that I'm recommending there that can be very helpful to you. Wikipedia actually has a fantastic collection of information on nature therapy. All right, that's about all I have in terms of offering information on ecotherapy and some suggestions about what you can do to take advantage of it. It's a very easy way to improve your quality of life, and it might be something that other people would want to join you in. So I would welcome your questions at a future point. Right now, I really want to get on to our next presenter, Emery Potter, who is a licensed clinical mental health counselor, a licensed alcohol and drug counselor, a nationally certified counselor, and he's in private practice in Burlington, Vermont. He does outpatient psychotherapy, clinical supervision, and consultation, as you can see. He's an active Freemason, and I think you'll find that he has some very interesting things to say. Emery, you want to unmute your mic and take the show, please.
Ready? I had to adjust my seating position, so I just want to check to see if you all can see me okay.
Yes.
Yes, all right. So I do have some feline assistants that might make appearances here and there. So naturally, it's a Zoom event, so someone's got to have a cat in the screen. So for all of us right now, with the COVID-19 pandemic, every single one of us has had our normal routines, our normal schedules, and aspects of our everyday life become uprooted. The way that we move about the world is different. Where we're working is different. where we're meeting, where we're gathering together with friends, family, church services, Masonic meetings. It's all different. And during the first, I think, couple weeks that here in Vermont, things were starting to shut down, I began to do a virtual therapy, telehealth therapy, psychotherapy, instead of in-person therapy, which is what I normally do. And I've been doing solely just virtual therapy for the past 5 months since then. And one thing that I've really noticed is that I hear over and over and over again, why am I so tired? I didn't do anything today. All I did was a few notes for work and made some food, and that's it. And I've been hearing a lot of self-judgment from people about the way that they're spending their time, that despite in some ways, due to working from home and not being able to go out and do the things that people normally do, there is more downtime in a lot of ways. Yet, a lot of people were finding themselves less productive and also just more judgmental about what they were doing. And I think it's important to put this in perspective, that during times of stress, when things are uprooted, things are chaotic, the whole nervous system gets activated, and it makes it really difficult to concentrate and focus on creativity and goal-directed behavior. And this is a really physiological response, but a lot of people have a self-judgment about it, rather than understanding it as a natural response to stress. They tend to think that they must be doing something wrong. So to kind of put that in context, I think it's important to understand how the hierarchy of human needs works. There's a pyramid that illustrates the hierarchy of needs that are basically considered to be basic human needs, that range from most basic to more advanced. The most basic being your physiological needs. So things like food, shelter, water, warmth, cold, oxygen. Next, we might have safety needs, physical safety, emotional safety. Then moving up, we might have belonging, love, community. And then at the top, we might have more of a sense of purpose, a purpose in life, a sense of connection to spirituality. So I think that what I realized in working with people every day was that this was an opportunity to get back to basics in terms of how we spend our time and what our needs are. And the pandemic has forced us to do that in a lot of ways, because we had to stay inside and just think about how we're going to get our food and how we're going to pay our bills. But the working tools of Freemasonry, I think, are very useful to help conceptualize and connect an abstract or a philosophical principle to a concrete practice. And I think that the 24-inch gauge is certainly no exception to that. So here we have our 24-inch gauge. which we're taught is emblematical of the 24 hours of the day, which we're taught to divide into 3 equal parts, whereby are found 8 hours for the service to God and a distressed worthy brother, 8 hours for our usual avocations, and 8 for refreshment and sleep. So I think it's no mistake that this is a tool of the entered apprentice. This is a basic foundational tool, and it has limits that we can't escape. There's only 24 hours in the day. That's all we have in any given day. So I think that a lot of topics on the subject of time management tend to focus on the idea of being efficient. Reading about celebrities who get up at 5 a.m., go to the gym, meditate for an hour. They're just having a very productive, highly efficient day. And the goal of my advice is not about that. It's not about becoming more efficient. What it is more about gaining insight and awareness by examining how you spend your time. So most people have things like to-do lists, schedules, agendas, goals, and that type of thing. And a lot of that is really geared towards the future. These are things that I want to do, which is very useful. But I think that often life becomes so busy that we don't really have a chance to slow down and stop and examine where we already have been in hindsight. Because a day, those 24 hours, is comprised of so many little moments that over time add up. So a practice that I have introduced to a lot of my clients is the idea of time tracking. There's a lot of different ways of doing this that range from pretty basic to apps that are a lot more specific. I included some links in the information that give some really good examples of different ways to do this. And I also apologize, this is a pretty visual subject matter. So I'm not going to go into too much into the various methods, just because I think it's much better for you to see that in a visual way. But basically, it can just be as simple as having a notebook, having a journal, and in 15-minute increments, just try to recall what you did in a 24-hour period. And then do that for a certain period of time, maybe a few days, maybe a week, and then look at it and see what you notice. This is not an attempt to, judge what it is you're doing or beat yourself up for not doing more, but it's more to increase your consciousness of patterns that we don't really have the time to analyze very often. I think that the first step is collecting that data. So you can use lists, you can make little notes on a calendar. There's some other cool ways to track your day and gather data from your day. I personally also use a Fitbit, which tracks how many steps you take. It also tracks sleep, not only how many hours you're sleeping, but the different stages of sleep that you're getting. There's also options on the Fitbit to track how much water you're drinking and that kind of thing as well. But even just something as basic as seeing what is my sleep doing over time can give you a lot of insight. And then from that insight, you can get ideas about maybe how to make some changes in order to improve it. So once you have some data there to look at, I think for me, it's really helpful to see it in a visual way. On some of the links that I've shared, there are examples where people experimented with this time tracking method and actually made pie charts and graphs of, this is how I think that I spend my day. You know, I think I spend this amount of time reading a book. I think I spend this amount of time watching TV. And then they compared that with the actual data that they had. And the difference was pretty interesting. And again, it's not about judgment, but I think can be very empowering, because by being consciously aware of how you are spending your time, it then gives you freedom to make different decisions about what you want to prioritize. So that gives us the opportunity, you know, as people and as Masons, to think about our own needs. You know, some of those needs that I mentioned earlier, our need for, you know, safety, for health, our need for belonging, for connection, for spirituality, for meaning, for purpose in our life. So all those things, but also how our actions and our everyday life is reflecting our values. Because the behavior that we engage in is the evidence that we are living the values that are important to us. When I did a kind of educational night on kind of this subject of the 24-inch gauge with some of the brethren in Vermont, one thing that came up was that from almost every brother who shared what life was like for them, you know, since the pandemic, is that every single one of them mentioned helping somebody else. And that really stood out to me a lot. So I think that this can be an opportunity this time that we have. It's not about perfection. It's not about, you know, efficiency. But I think it's really about developing an awareness, a consciousness of how you spend your time, and learning about yourself in the kind of everyday arena, and then continuing to do it, continuing to experiment. The Enter an Apprentice, chalk, charcoal, and clay. Those are materials that are associated with the Enter an Apprentice. They're all temporary. They're all malleable. Chalk is easily wiped away. You know, clay is easily molded. And I think that's a really excellent analogy to keep in mind, that this is an ongoing, lifelong work in progress. So I think that's about sums it up for me. Thank you, brothers.
All right, Emery, thank you. And I encourage anyone who has questions for you to keep those questions in mind as we move on, so that later on we can have more discussion about this. All right, our next speaker is going to be Brother Derek Murphy. You can see here that he's a master's registered addiction specialist with over 20 years of experience working with adults and adolescents. And he's currently a director of clinical services for inpatient and outpatient substance use disorder clinics. And he's a relatively new Master Mason in a wonderful lodge up in Washington, Crucible. I've had the opportunity to visit with them, and really, really good brothers up there in that lodge. Brother Derek, you're going to be talking with us about mindfulness or living in the present. Please take it away.
Thank you very much, and good evening, brothers and our distinguished guests. On behalf of all the panelists here, I'd like to really take a moment to appreciate you joining us this evening and participating in these conversations about how we can enrich our overall well-being. And so I wanted to start off kind of my concept about mindfulness and living in the present by acknowledging this wonderful statement from the Dalai Lama, who reminds us that, you know, there are only 2 days in the year that nothing can be done. One is called yesterday and the other is called tomorrow. And the rest of that statement is, so today is the right day to love, believe, do, and mostly live. And so when I think about that, one of the ways that I think I can most easily relate this for folks is if you think about the concept of walking. I know, stay with me for just half a second here, but if you were walking down the sidewalk and you spent your time looking back over your shoulder, that wouldn't get you anywhere, right? And then I can equate that to spending too much time living in our past. Likewise, if you continue in that forward momentum and you spend all your time looking, you know, 1,000, 2,000 yards down the way, you're going to miss that obvious open, oh, there's that cat, Emery, that you discussed. You're going to miss that obvious pothole right in front of you. And that, I think, is living too far into the future. And so if we think about how we naturally progress and walk, our eyes kind of scan in our immediate foot range and then, you know, 1 to 2, 2 to 3 feet in front of us. It naturally progresses as we do that. And I think that's because we know instinctively that we need to be grounded in the here and the now, right? We need to be in this particular moment. And so if I can borrow a little bit more from Brother Emery when he was talking about the 24-inch gauge, I think we can relate that to mindfulness and this concept of living in the present, in the here and the now. So the 24-inch gauge is emblematical of the 24 hours of this day, right? It's not emblematical of yesterday. It's certainly not thinking about tomorrow very much. It's grounded in today. So in this moment, in today, we have those hours to give to service to God and worthy brethren, hours for our usual vocations, and the rest for refreshment and sleep, right? So we need to be really mindful about how we utilize those 24 hours today in our process. I'm not suggesting that because of that allegory that we shouldn't be mindful of our past and that we shouldn't be thoughtful about our future. Both of those are very wise and appropriate things to do. But I think it's when we spend an inordinate amount of time, we're out of balance, spending too much time living in that past, being stuck in shame cycles, blame cycles, etc., or being so focused in the future that we're unable to be truly present. We miss the opportunity, as the Buddha would say, be where you are, otherwise you will miss your life. Let that one sink in for a minute. So I'd like to start off today by talking a little bit about pandemic. The pandemic, it's giving us all opportunities to rethink our alcohol and substance uses. I think that would be a fair thing to say, and maybe hopefully not so much within our particular community, but in the communities around us. And so we might be seeing some of our loved ones, we might be seeing our brothers, our sisters, physiological that is, our family members, our coworkers, other folks, maybe enjoying substances to excess, or maybe spending an inordinate amount of time being preoccupied with substances. One of the examples I often give is, think about living in cubicle life, and you've got that cubicle mate that sticks his head over the top and says, hey, we're going out Friday night, right? Friday night, we're going out right after work. We're going out 5 p.m. We're going out Friday night. Can't wait to go out. It's going to be a great time. And then, you realize as you look at your watch that it's Wednesday. Perhaps they're a little bit preoccupied with that substance and with that opportunity to dump, all of life's responsibilities and so on and so forth. And so we want to be mindful that in pandemic-based situations, that we don't find ourselves not following that cardinal virtue of temperance that reminds us to do all things in balance, right? Do all things in good measure, and be mindful of, the rest of our virtues as part of that process. So what I thought maybe I would focus on is just a basic self-care concept of mindfulness and some of that recovery connection. So in mindfulness, it's really important to follow 3 key components. And the first one being about intentional. And so it's maybe a simplification, but it's an important statement to say that this needs to be a conscientious effort on your part to partake in and participate in understanding what's going on, what you're going through from one moment to the next. So you have to be really intentional about this process and be open to receiving that information, okay? The next part of that is being accepting then of that information. So we would not allow ourselves to deny what we're sensing, what we're experiencing. So if you're feeling something, it's okay to acknowledge that, and it's okay to catalog that information as part of this process. And then lastly, it's really critical and really important that we be non-judgmental of ourselves. So if we're overly critical, that causes problems, or if we think too highly of ourselves, that causes problems. So that judgmental swing can go in either direction to excess. Kind of goes back to our concept of temperance, right? Living within that balance, living within that moderation. So how do we get started in this process? So one of the things maybe I want us to think about is just remembering that mindfulness is essentially the art of being present in our own lives. So that's how we start off there. We be present. And that sounds like, again, a really simple thing to do, but if you look back and reflect and think about how many times throughout the day are you truly focusing on your present moment. And I'm guilty of this just like anybody else. I'm looking at my calendar and seeing what I've got coming up over the next 2 to 3 hours. And do I have time to speak with the clinician that's coming through my door right now? So when they say things like, hey, do you have 5 minutes? I have to be genuine and authentic and like, do I? So we need to be fully focused on the present moment and spend the time and allow our attention to be really focused on that, okay? Why that might be really important for individuals that are looking at or experiencing recovery is because typically individuals that experience substance use disorders, they've really gotten good at being escape artists, right? They know how to disappear, be it through substance use, be it through risky behaviors, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really important to be mindful and to be present. Lastly, being present starts with paying attention to the ordinary things of our life. So I know that sometimes people hear the concept of mindfulness and they start to think of Buddhism, or they think of other philosophies that focus on mindfulness as a tool, and they're like, oh, wow, that sounds very shishi and very out there, but it's really not. It can be a very ordinary process. So I invite you to do that. And remember to do this takes practice. So we want to do it at ultimately regularly and often so that we can increase this skill. The next part is focusing on our breath. And so it's spending a little bit time in that mindfulness to really allow breath to be the controlling factor as we're getting grounded, as we're being really present, as opposed to utilizing substances to retreat or sulk. We would start to use our natural healing powers to really moderate how we're feeling. And so being present and then focusing on our breath can help immediately restore our sense of calm and keep things on track for us. I think about that in context with what Brother Chuck was talking about in forest therapy as well. Think about the 1-2 punch of something like that. So sitting in a beautiful surrounding, hearing nature around us, being able to be present and take that all in with our senses, and then using our breath to modulate and moderate how we feel within that environment. The next component is about recognizing our thoughts as thoughts. So as we're sitting there in the stillness, sometimes we're still going to be bombarded by the thoughts of the day. They're still going to be crashing in there, and we're still going to be thinking about, like, oh, I've got this meeting coming up in 15 minutes. Do I really have time to do this practice right now? I just had a horrible phone call with my significant other, and I'm really concerned about the little ones, et cetera, et cetera. So there might be a number of reasons as to why we'd be really thoughtful about that, okay? So we want to recognize our thoughts and understand that they are going to fill our head, and that we always have a tape playing, and that sometimes we need to be able to conscientiously reach up and hit that off button to the best of our ability, knowing that it's never going to be perfect, acknowledging that, but taking the time to try and still things as we can, okay? One of the things that's really common on that tape that I was talking about is negative self-talk, and it's a very destructive thing. And so being mindful and taking time to sit and be still and hear that chatter might give you some insight to something that you've been experiencing and you just weren't completely aware of that. And that is some of that negative self-talk. So being able to disrupt that, to be really conscious about that, and to bring it to the forethought might give you something to focus on as you work throughout the day. And so be kind to yourself and check in with your thoughts multiple times throughout the day as part of this mindfulness practice, okay? The next part is expanding our compassion. And so I think about the fact that, as human beings, most of us are born with a desire to connect. We want to connect with one another. We are social individuals. Even the introvert and the extrovert still have their social natures at different times and parts of that. And when we feel disconnected from all of society, we suffer. And so thinking about, in the process of being present, focusing on breath, recognizing my thoughts, if I can expand that heart sense or that feeling of compassion, means that I can try to expand my circle of connectivity to others and to beings around me. And that doesn't mean that we have to like or approve of everything that others do. It just simply means that we think of our life in terms of us, the greater good, the greater we, and not opposed to me versus them, if I may. Compassion strengthens our ability to build healthy and healing relationships as well. And so sometimes individuals that have experienced the wreckage of addiction or substance use disorders as a whole might find that those have been challenged and broken down over the years, okay? Next, I want to think about the concept of being still. And that can be a challenge because I think society as a whole tries to suggest that busyness is goodness, right? And so I think there's a lot of folks that have been experiencing during these pandemic times and during stay-at-home orders or other things that you might be experiencing in your region, that busyness is gone. And some folks have found themselves with a sense of emptiness around that. Like, what do I do now? As opposed to looking at that as an opportunity to do some inward reflection, do some reconnecting with family members, taking up opportunities and time to read, to write, to be thoughtful, etc. And it is in the stillness and not in continual activity that we find ourselves free to discover our own truths that give us meaning and purpose to life. So I suspect that many of the brother Masons that might be listening in here, we've all had those opportunities, or I hope that we are having those opportunities in your lodge to sit in stillness and in reflection. And maybe that might be one of the tools that you even use as part of your lodge opening, an opportunity to sit in meditation prior to the full lodge opening and the education that you might receive that night or something like that. Mindfulness reminds us that in stillness, we find the wisdom to become human being instead of human doing. Think about that one as well. And then, lastly, I want to kind of say, some of the ways that you can get started, instead of following these things, is you can do other activities. So yes, you can do mindfulness meditation sessions, and there are many of those to find on YouTube channels or other social media constructs. But it could be in yoga, it could be in your religious or faith-based practices. Those might be ways that you find yourself connecting. All of these can be ways that would promote a sense of inner stillness. Even, you know, that forest scene that Brother Chuck referred to, Brother Emery talked about, you know, being mindful of our time and time tracking. Even in those activities, we can be practicing and enhancing, you know, our stillness as we're thinking about that. Gardeners, those that exercise, woodworkers, painters, musicians, all of these folks find themselves in a sense of stillness, if you will, within their craft or within their art that gives them an opportunity to have really healing and important headspace. Some of the references here that I'd like you to have is Thich Nhat Hanh is one of the really fascinating Buddhist monks of our time right now, and started a website, Plum Village, which has grown to an international thing. A very prolific author, and just full of, to me, really meaningful acts. What I really appreciate about Thich Nhat Hanh is, you know, he talks about anybody can be a really good Buddhist within temple, but how do you take those actions to the streets? So it's just another thing for us to think about. It's like being a really great Mason at lodge one time per month, but how do you take Masonry out into your daily life and into the streets? So something for us to continue to chew on. Benefits of mindfulness there, some mindfulness practices to step up your recovery. You know, Smart Recovery is one of the online tools for individuals that might be seeking a place where you can commune about the act of healing and recovery from substance use disorder specifically. And then some of that pandemic information I drew right from the CDC around daily life coping, stress coping, and alcohol use, and its increase along the way. I am really, really thankful for this opportunity to speak with all of you tonight and to offer up some of these things. And I will continue to stick around and be present in hopes that maybe there are some questions later on that I can be part of. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Brother Derek. I really appreciate the information that you brought, and also the way you tied mindfulness together with the previous two topics. It's very insightful. One thing that I noted was you moved from talking about the importance of being kind to yourself, monitoring your own negative self-talk, into the importance of being compassionate with others. And I think that that's a really significant connection there. So thank you for bringing those forward. Our next speaker is Brother Robert Sachs. Many of us know him as Bob. Bob is a licensed clinical social worker, licensed massage therapist, and yoga instructor with over 40 years. Gosh, Bob, you're old. 40 years experience with Indian and Tibetan healing traditions. He's the co-owner of Diamond Way Ayurveda and an author of like something like a dozen or more books related to Ayurveda and Buddhism, past master from King David's Lodge. And he's also involved with the Academy of Reflection and really helping to grow that in California. Bob's going to be talking about Ayurvedic principles and diet. Bob, you're up.
Thanks so much, Brother Chuck. And thank everybody for being there, and thank the presenters before me for just offering. It seems like we're sort of like weaving a thread between all of these various presentations, and what comes to mind is definitely that it would seem like the entered apprentice degree is basically trying to help brothers to learn how to balance their lifestyle, really becoming aware of their time and what they do in their time, getting that all straightened out, and then stepping out into nature in the fellowcraft degree. So I think there's a way in which we look at, first of all, how do we balance ourselves? And then how do we come out into the world? And then finally, how do we master our relationship to that world? And in that way, what's very fascinating is the system of Ayurveda, which is the the science of longevity from Southeast Asia and India. It's been around in a written form over 2,000 years, in an oral form 3,000 or 4,000 years before that. And really, in many respects, people think, oh, Ayurveda must be a religion. It's not a religion. It doesn't tell people that they need to become vegetarian. Really what it's about is, how do you look at what you do in a day, and how does it impact your mind and your body? One of the things that's really important in Ayurveda, as well as Chinese medicine and Tibetan medicine, is that the notion is that mind always precedes body. And that is, our emotions, our thoughts, then have an impact on our lifestyle. Then what happens is, as our lifestyle is balanced, we live a balanced life. As our mind and our emotions become disturbed, we start making poorer choices. And as a result, our lifestyle begins to fall apart. And to some extent, what it is that our minds are connected to a basic aspect of who we are, which is, again, what we've been hearing about this evening. And I like to tell people that we all know what's going on. We know it's a good lifestyle. We know when we're just playing around. We know when we're going off the wagon, so to speak, with what we're doing. We just agree not to blow each other's cover. So we do things that we know aren't good for us. We don't sleep as much as we should. We drink too much. We consume too many things that are unhelpful to us. We do activities that disrupt what's going on. And as a result, there is in Ayurveda an energetic. Ayurveda looks at the body in terms of three energies, and they are Sanskrit words. One is called Vata, one is called Pitta, and one is called Kapha. Vata has to do with basically the movement of the body, the subtle aspects of our body. Pitta is more about the circulation and the metabolic processes, and Kapha is more about the physicality of our body. And the thing about Vata is this, and what's interesting in relating it to Masonry, and in Masonry in our interdependence degree, we're told we need to balance our lifestyle. Look at our time, measure it well, do things that help us connect to the greater spirit around us, connect us to our work, and then help to re-nourish our system. But what happens when all of our routines that we build up get disrupted? So welcome to the world of COVID-19. You may have had all your routines, and they may have all been very, very successful in keeping your life in order. And then suddenly, you're not going to work anymore. You're living on much less money. You're beginning to live in a household with people that you haven't really been spending a whole lot of time because you've been somewhere else. So all of this disrupts this energy in your body known as Vata. And it manifests, Vata expresses itself physically in terms of our central nervous system, our joints, and our GI tract. Those are where it's most obvious. And so therefore, if you're experiencing problems with nervous stress and tension, increased joint pain, constipation, bloating, gas, the buildup of cortisol and the gaining of weight, insomnia, and a variety of emotional issues that you normally don't have to deal with or have not had to really deal with in the kind of present moment way that you're having to as a result of your lifestyle being so disrupted, suddenly all these symptoms begin to crop up. And what happens is, as we have our life disrupted, the body tells the story. The body lets us know what is going on. So the issue in Ayurveda is, given the fact that all of your lifestyle has been disrupted, how do you bring it back to balance? Now, to some extent, some of the things that Brother Chuck was talking about are really, really important, because being out in nature, connecting with good quality air. Air is considered, or breath is considered, a really important aspect of Vata, which includes also meditation. So being outside and breathing good, fresh air, being around plants to provide us that opportunity, and then taking those practices inside our home to meditate and work with the breath. All these things are extremely, extremely important, okay? And then doing these things, not only slowing down, but reestablishing routine. So when we hear from Emery about the idea of time and managing time, it's all very, very important, and gets back to the importance of basically getting our life more in order. Now, what's interesting in Ayurveda is that although lifestyle is 90% of the game, and all these factors have to do with lifestyle, 90% of that 90% has to do with diet. There's a story that has to do with, and I was told this by a teacher when I was living in London, who said when a person would go to a monastery, the gatekeeper of a monastery would have to ask you a very basic question. And the question was, how do you live? And the real answer is that you had to ponder and be grounded enough to understand is, I live by food. So food and diet is that 90% of lifestyle we need to pay attention to. But of course, we have our gourmet perspectives. We have all sorts of perspectives that have to do with the way in which we socialize. But the fact is, when our routines are disrupted, what we need to do is kind of be more temperate about our diet, and to some extent get our diet back in line. Although in Ayurveda and in Oriental medicine, they talk about when we are out of balance, there's like the lemming law. And the lemming law is, and this was an example of one of my daughter's husband. So he's a manager at Trader Joe's, and he saw a number of people coming in, and rather than do regular shopping, they were buying alcohol and candy. So that's the lemming response. We want to indulge ourselves. We're spacing out, and we need to somehow get distracted by too much sugar and too much alcohol. So I want to talk about some very basic things that Ayurveda talks about with respect to diet, which will help your body slow down, which will improve your mindfulness, and maybe help you get connected better when you go out into nature. So these are the things that I've mentioned in the outline that you see in front of you. The first is eating at regular times. This goes back to the entered apprentice degree. Having it so that although you may be sleeping in, although you may be going to bed later, what you want to do is, how do you make it so that you are nourishing yourself at very, very regular times? Trying to keep a routine in that kind of way, in terms of however you choose that to be, when it is going to be, make it so that you demarcate it in your time so that you know when it is time to eat. The other thing is eating in a more peaceful environment, which means not necessarily listening to the news while you're trying to eat your breakfast, okay? Trying to make it so that people gather together in a peaceful environment, making it so that there's less distraction where you eat your meals. Suddenly discovering your dining room table doesn't have to be covered with games, toys, and papers, okay? The next point is reducing your use of alcoholic beverages. Ayurveda doesn't say you can't drink, but the idea is realizing that what happens is that, especially being more sequestered, we become more sensitized. And probably what then happens is when we drink, we are sort of anesthetizing ourselves to being in one place. And so what we need to realize is, can we enjoy a glass of wine, a whiskey, or whatever it is, but in a way that makes it so that we are maintaining a level of focus and awareness. Reducing our reliance on coffee and tea. So to some extent, a lot of the things, even the idea of meat and dairy products, Many of these things that we consume in a day have to do with us being more in our routine, being out on the road, doing various types of work, and suddenly your activity level is slowing down, and therefore the kind of food you consume needs to change. These things don't have to be eliminated, but you need to be aware of the fact that if you continue to consume as if you're at work, whether it's a very cerebral job or whether it's a very physical job, and suddenly all these routines are changed in your life, that food which has been fueling you to do what you're doing has got to change. So there's got to be a reduction in awareness of the kinds of foods, like especially animal foods, which are much stronger, and the use of stimulants like coffee and tea, that kind of thing. When vata is disturbed in our bodies, we tend to get drier. So we get itchier skin. We find that our joints are popping. We find that getting up and getting down, that suddenly our joints are bothering us more. Partly what happens is we start actually getting dehydrated when our vata is high, which means it's very, very important for you to drink water. Stimulant drinks and alcohols dehydrate the body. Therefore, if you're consuming them at the regular level, you are dehydrating yourself even more. So you need more water. What they notice, for example, in schools where parents have not really encouraged their kids to drink water is that as you improve and increase water for children, their brains seem to light up. So what we need to be aware of is that importance of hydration for a better nervous system, hydration for our movement, hydration so we feel less distracted by our bodies. One of the things in terms of diet and having it so that cortisol levels go up is that if you drink a cup of hot water in the morning and about 10 minutes after every meal, hot water, which is the first remedy of Ayurveda, it will help you to lose the weight you may be putting on. Then there's the idea of more cooked foods, less raw. If you eat raw foods like salads, everybody thinks salads are great, but when you're more vata, they become more constipating and more bloating. So what you do is, in Ayurveda, they say in the middle of your day is when you have the greatest digestive fire. So eat a salad during the middle of the day. Generally speaking, though, your diet should be warm, should be cooked, grains, vegetables, all these kinds of things, legumes, all of them are very, very good, especially if they are more warm and nurturing for your body in a very, very grounded way. And the last point I want to make has to do with something that Brother Chuck talked about, breathing outside. And we talked about the idea of pacing yourself in terms of timing, which involves breathing, and the importance of breathing in meditation and mindfulness. Well, breathing is also important in chewing. As you chew your food and you chew it more, what happens is you're actually pumping this whole area of your brain, and you're actually not only making your food more digestible, you're actually stimulating your central nervous system. You actually will get more nutritive benefit, but also more brain stimulation for the food you consume if you breathe better while you're chewing and you chew more. So those are the things I want to mention. There's a list of things that I have in terms of the resources that I talk about. Those are various articles that have been, I've looked at in terms of some of the companies that do a lot about Ayurvedic diet. I've mentioned also something about Tibetan medicine, because Tibetan medicine, what's nice about maybe you reading that article is that Tibetan Ayurveda includes the use of animal foods. So if you're not vegetarian or vegan, you want to see a perspective that includes more of the kinds of foods you're used to, then that particular article might be incredibly useful. And then beyond that, there are a couple of my books that you might like. If you do, let me know. Happy to talk to you more about it. But I'll stop for now. So thank you very much for listening.
All right, Bob, thank you so much for that fascinating presentation. So we're about to enter into the discussion phase of our program for tonight, and welcome any questions or additional comments that anyone might have, and Brother Randy's going to help us do that. Please keep these guidelines that are on the screen in mind as we move forward. Remember, this is not a private forum, so just be mindful of that. This is not a therapy or counseling session. We've got numbers here that if you really are in need of urgent assistance, you can use. We will welcome your questions, but please ask you to refrain from political commentary, and remember that we're going to make this recording available to the public later on. And with that, I will stop the screen share, and let's see what we can do in terms of having a conversation.
Brother Bob, I've been looking at the 5 Tibetan rites. Okay, you know what it is. Could you tell me what you think of it? And I've started, but I need somebody like you to tell me about it.
They are basically a very simple system of yoga, which almost anybody can use or modify. I started doing them in about 1988, 89, and I've done a variation on them daily since then. The books that are on them are really very, very good. They're very easy to follow, and they can be modified. And what I notice is that when I do that, in yoga, they talk about the smoothing out of the channels of the body. And what I would say is if you have a hard time getting up in the morning, you can use them to kind of get yourself kind of stimulated for the day. If you are really wound up and keyed up at the end of the evening, and you are just actually, to some extent, too exhausted and distracted to go to sleep well, using the rites can be a great way to sort of like smooth the body out and make it easier to get to sleep. So I highly recommend them.
That's what I wanted to know. Thank you. Okay, while we're waiting, I have one more question about you, for you. The breathing. What would you recommend? Any special way of breathing, or concentration on breathing, or you're pretty good at knowing where I'm coming from, so
well,
I'll stop.
I think really, when Brother Chuck was talking about getting out in nature, it's like, just suck it in. Just enjoy it. Get out there and make it so that you can really just take a deep breath in and enjoy. In Ayurveda, there's a subtle aspect of the breath called prana. It is life force. And when you're outside, that life force is more there. So getting a chance where you suddenly notice you're sitting outside and you suddenly find yourself sighing. It's literally what's going on is that pranic force is beginning to invade your body and give you your life back. So that doesn't have to be practiced in any way in particular. When you go into martial arts, when you go into yoga, there are specific ways of breathing that are helpful if you want to learn those. The rites talk about the way of how you breathe when you do the rites. Breathing meditation, there is the focus on the breath that's there. With respect to eating, what I would say is breathing also while you're chewing and paying attention to your food makes it so that your mouth is less open. and therefore you end up focusing more on the ability to digest your foods better. But the only kind of techniques that are specialized have to do with the more meditative and yogic traditions. Otherwise, just breathe in to get some good vitality into your system.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll take off from that one a little bit. One of the things that can be really helpful when you're trying to get the benefits of outdoor air and you're in a natural setting like that is to breathe deeply through the nose and really be mindful of the scents that you're experiencing, the aromas and fragrances that you're experiencing. Try to smell the dirt. Try to smell the plants around you. And if you have to, like stick your nose in a flower, there's nothing wrong with that. If you've got allergy issues, then maybe there's a trade-off there. But yeah, so in forest therapy, in forest bathing, one of the things they'll do is they'll take pine needles and rub them together between their palms, and then hold that up and breathe that in. And there has been some research. I don't have the data in front of me, but there has been some research about the scent of fresh pine and the effects that it has on the body. So there's just lots of things there. To really be mindful of those fragrances can be an important part of that experience, and to take full deep breaths, like Bob was talking about, to intentionally breathe deeper, fill your lungs more than you typically would, blow out more than you typically would, without straining. That's an important thing to do, because a lot of us are not during our day, throughout our days, we're not really emptying our lungs and filling our lungs with much depth, and it can be helpful to do that when we take a little bit of time for self-care.
I just want to capture, I go on that one, Chuck, as well. Just one more thing, because what you're saying is just, it's so beautiful. And as your birthday's coming up, this is really important for you. Okay. All right. And what it is I was taught by a Tibetan doctor something called Sherpa breathing. So Sherpas are out and they take people up to the Mount Everest and everything like that. And this is a very simple thing to do, and I'm going to demonstrate it. Imagine that I'm standing, and what you're going to do is you're going to do this exercise as many times as years you are old. Okay. So I'm going to do them more times than Chuck does. And some of you may do it less, some of you may do it more. But the idea is your hands are to your sides. And then when you're outside, especially, it's better to do it outside. You breathe in, bring your hands over your head, and then you breathe out. And you just let go of the breath. And then you breathe in and out. And breathe in and out. And you do that as many times as you are old. Okay? Which means it's an exercise that you do more and more as you get older. But the idea is to have it. It's just very nice. You just breathe in, which lifts your lungs and really get great expansion. And then you just let it out and go back up and let it out. So.
Good one, Bob. Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Appreciate that.
If it's okay, I'll just add something about smell. So in terms of memory, there's different kinds of memory. We can remember something visual. We can remember something kind of in our body or in our mind's eye. But olfactory, the sense of smell, is actually one of the most powerful forms of memory. That's why sometimes if you come across a smell out of nowhere, you'll just get a really vivid memory, because that sense of smell is, in terms of our nervous system, comes from that really old part of our nervous system. And I think that, as human beings, we have this fancy brain that can think about a lot of fancy things, but we have a very primitive nervous system. And, I don't know what God was thinking when he put that combo together, but it's kind of a complicated combination. And so I think sometimes something that speaks directly to the nervous system can be way more helpful than something that's cognitive. And a really powerful way of doing that is by smell. So like some of the other brothers mentioned, like the smell of nature, I think is really powerful. But also, if there's a certain scent that you associate with like being calm, feeling good, feeling peaceful, that can also be really effective. And kind of bringing the nervous system back to the present versus all the places the mind wants to go.
Right. Thank you for that, Emery. Yeah, and that also brings up something else that I had meant to share, and that is the importance of having plants inside. it's really good to have living plants inside, in your office space, in your living space. Those things can be very helpful in terms of just the quality of the air itself, let alone the extra benefits that come from whatever fragrances they might give off or other chemicals. And getting back to what I was saying earlier about the power of green light is to bring more green, just the color green, into your environments, into your workspace, into your living space. That just doing that can give you some of the benefits of exposure to green light in nature. Do we have any other questions or comments from anyone?
Brother Chuck, we actually don't have any questions from the Facebook feed, and mostly were comments on the Zoom group chat. I think we've blown everybody away. I've got some notes here that I can quickly run down.
All right, please do.
All right. First off, Chuck, you spoke about living a natural existence with the green therapy, and I really connected with that. I thought that was, for me, a very deep thing, and it's given me resolve to do exactly what you said: bring more plants in and do more outdoor type activity. Now, I have to be careful about the outdoor activity because I got rather sunburned the other day from doing exactly that. So hats are definitely in my future with the outdoors. But then Emery tied Maslow to time management, and I have never ever heard that before. That was cool. I got to tell you, that was unexpected. And then expanded into charcoal, chalk, charcoal, and clay, and tied that back into Chuck's presentation on greenery and getting back to basics. Now that was pretty cool, I got to tell you. Now, how you tied all of that into journaling, I got to tell you, I got to go back and watch your program again, because I'm impressed. That was cool. Derek walked us through mindfulness, staring 2 to 3 feet ahead. Now, to me, that seems like an introvert's way of walking, but that's, my take on that. And I thought that was really cool. Following temperance and staying balanced struck chords with me, and mindfulness into recovery did as well, although I'm fortunate that I don't have need of the recovery piece of it so much. I have done some PTSD recovery type work, and that I think kind of ties in. Now, the being intentional and conscientious effort, accepting and non-judgmental, except to all those bad people out there. Okay, I'm just kidding. No, that's judgmental. It also tied that back to the 24-inch gauge, which ties back to the time management, which ties back to Chuck talking about living in the natural existence and being in that natural existence. Again, I am totally shocked and amazed at how well all of this ties together. And Bob, wow, body-mind connection, Vata, the issues with Vata causing the other issues, including cortisol symptoms, which ties back to Chuck, which ties back to Emery, which ties back to Derek. The lemming law, I thought lemming law was really funny. I don't know if that's a actual law or that's something you made up, but that was really, really funny.
Extremely
And
scientific.
And then of course, your advice to focus on a schedule of continuous partying for consistency of energy, and drinking on a schedule as opposed to just drinking air. I'm with you. with you. I gotta say that Bill Cosby's skit was brought to my attention not too long ago by Mr. Parker on here about chocolate cake. And if you don't remember that skit, it's about breakfast being breakfast for the kids being a shortcut of eggs, wheat or grains, and milk all together in chocolate cake. So
I'm glad you mentioned that, Randy, because one thing I forgot to say about, and chocolate cake is the idea of it's kind of a fatty, gooey substance. But what's important in vata is actually oil, like omega-3s, but the idea of having something to succor the body periodically, like a good quality chocolate cake. Hey, Chuck will probably have that tomorrow. He's balancing his vata tomorrow. So having something like that, when it's good quality, is it's in Ayurvedic they call it sattvic, which means it nourishes the spirit.
very, very cool. Brothers, I was blown away. Those are the things that I was that I took note of because I was struck by them, and I don't know what to say except that. Cleo says Godiva chocolates.
Oh yeah, I'm telling you,
Godiva.
if it wasn't for dark chocolate, my quality of life would be significantly lower. And it's so good for you. It is so good for you.
Okay, so Mark has asked about having Chuck mention the middle pillar with respect to being able to maintain balance with regard to nature, with regard to what we were discussing here.
Okay. Yeah, I can talk about that. The middle pillar practice shows up in lots of traditions in one form or another. It certainly is in Tibetan Buddhism, and it's found in the Indian Vedic traditions. It's in yoga. It's in Hermeticism, and the idea is that we all have an energy system that basically aligns with our spine, and so most of us, I think, even in pop culture, are familiar with the idea of chakras, that there are particular places along that central energy system where the energy seems to be collected and from which energy seems to emanate of different kinds. And we can kind of get in touch with this just by thinking about some of the language that we naturally use when we talk about experiencing significantly moving events. Like my heart was in my throat, and that describes a feeling, right? And that feeling is the result of a movement of energy, or that made me sick to my stomach. And that feeling is the result of a movement of energy that happens. That made my heart warm is another one. That gave me a headache. There are these places up and down this central line of our body where these energies are really clustered very tightly. And these energies are different for each of those locations. Most traditions associate them with the elements, like the 4 elements of earth, water, air, and fire, and other traditions have additional elements. And the idea is to keep those elements in harmony with each other, and to keep those channels of energy open. And so typically the way that is done is through meditation. You visualize these energy centers. Different traditions have different colors associated with them. You use the power of your imagination to feel their presence. You use the breath to charge them and to integrate them by imagining energy moving back and forth between them, and using the timing of the breath and using the imagination to do all of that. And typically, just every tradition that I know of also has some sort of sound that's made differently with each of those locations. It could be a mantra. It might be like in the Hermetic tradition, we use a Hebrew God name, one of the Hebrew names for the divine, to vibrate each of these centers. And this can be a really useful way of keeping these energies moving, flowing in a healthy, balanced way throughout our lives. And if this is a practice that you do routinely, if you stop, you'll notice how other energies in your body and other symptoms. I mean, talked about the GI tract. Bob talked about the GI tract, and this is also true for respiration and those sorts of things. Pulse can sometimes be a revealer. You'll start to notice that, okay, I'm not keeping those energies moving as freely and as in harmony as I could. So lots of traditions. My first introduction to working with this kind of inner technology was through Kundalini Yoga. And then later on, I learned some of the Hermetic, which is, they specifically call it the middle pillar exercise in the Hermetic tradition. So yeah, Mark, thank you for bringing that up. That is a very good practice, and one that I would recommend people go out and search for and learn more about. I'm absolutely sure that Bob can give some good resources in Tibetan Buddhism for that. If you're interested in working specifically with the 7 chakra system, there's an excellent old book by John Selby called A Gentle Guide to Kundalini Awakening. And if I remember the title correctly, but John Selby is a therapist who became a teacher in yoga, and put out this really fine little book about how to actually work with the chakras in the way that we've been talking about.